It began with a statement so restrained, so carefully measured, that it almost dissolved into the background of routine royal communication, the kind of wording that usually passes without consequence, unnoticed by most and questioned by none. Yet, hidden within that calm delivery was a shift so deliberate, so precisely timed, that by the moment its true meaning began to surface, the structure it altered had already adjusted, leaving no room for reversal and no space for immediate understanding. And it was in that quiet aftermath that the magnitude of what had occurred started to settle. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a slow and undeniable weight that spread through the palace like an unspoken realization. In what insiders have begun to describe as one of the most calculated internal realignments in recent royal history, Princess Anne is believed to have taken a step that was neither impulsive nor symbolic in the superficial sense, but instead deeply strategic, a move that reflected not emotion, but long-term awareness. And that move centered around the quiet reassignment of significant military honours to Catherine, Princess of Wales, while simultaneously signalling a subtle yet unmistakable contraction in the standing of Queen Camilla, a dual action that did not announce itself through confrontation, yet carried the unmistakable tone of recalibration, as if the monarchy itself had chosen to shift its internal balance without inviting resistance or explanation. What made the moment particularly striking was not only the action itself, but the environment in which it unfolded. Because this was not a response to crisis, nor a decision masked within celebration, it emerged instead during a period of apparent stability, a time when senior aides and observers alike believed the internal dynamics of influence were settled, predictable, even secure. And it was precisely within that illusion of steadiness that the move achieved its full effect, catching those within the system off guard. Not because they were unaware of underlying tensions, but because they believed such tensions would evolve gradually, in line with the monarchy's long-standing rhythm of slow adaptation. Yet what occurred defied that expectation entirely, compressing what might have taken years into a single decisive moment. Inside the palace, the immediate reaction was not chaos, but something more controlled and, in many ways, more telling. A quiet scramble for clarity, where conversations became cautious, tones lowered, and language carefully chosen, as advisers sought not only to interpret the decision, but to understand its implications. Because within a system built on hierarchy and symbolism, even the smallest adjustment carries layered meaning. And here, the adjustment was anything but small. It was structural, touching not only titles and roles, but perception itself. And perception, within the monarchy, is not secondary to power. It is power. For decades, Princess Anne has operated within that understanding, with a level of discipline that few can match. Her reputation shaped not by spectacle, but by consistency, not by public approval, but by internal respect. She has long been viewed as a figure who does not act for visibility, but for necessity, someone whose loyalty is directed not toward individuals, but toward the continuity of the institution itself. And it is precisely that reputation that gives this moment its gravity. Because when a figure defined by restraint chooses to intervene, the intervention is rarely reactive. It is almost always premeditated, grounded in observation accumulated over years, rather than triggered by a single event. Her decision reflects a deep comprehension of the monarchy's symbolic language, particularly in relation to military honours, which are often misunderstood by those outside the institution as ceremonial roles. Yet within royal structure, they represent something far more significant. They are embodiments of trust, bridges between the crown and the armed forces, acknowledgements of alignment with those who serve and sacrifice. And because of this, their reassignment carries implications that extend far beyond internal protocol. It signals a shift in where confidence is placed and where representation is most strongly anchored. For Catherine, the reassignment appears, on the surface, to be a moment of sudden elevation. Yet, in reality, it is the culmination of a gradual and deliberate process, one that has unfolded over years through consistent engagement, measured presence, and a clear understanding of how influence is built within both public and institutional spaces. She has cultivated credibility not through assertion, but through repetition, showing up, listening, maintaining composure, and aligning herself with causes that resonate beyond immediate visibility, particularly within military communities, where respect is earned over time, rather than granted through title alone. This consistency has allowed her to establish a form of authority that feels less imposed and more recognized. And it is this distinction that makes her elevation significant, because it does not disrupt tradition, but appears to extend it, presenting her not as a departure from the monarchy's established identity, but as a continuation, adapted for a changing context, one that values relatability alongside formality, and stability alongside evolution. For Camilla, however, the implications of the shift carry a different emotional and structural weight, because her position within the monarchy has always been shaped by a narrative of endurance, one that required navigating public skepticism and establishing legitimacy over time. Her titles have functioned not only as markers of status, but as confirmations of acceptance, reinforcing her place within an institution that does not easily grant permanence. And when those titles begin to shift, even subtly, the effect is not limited to protocol. It touches identity itself, raising questions that extend beyond role into perception and belonging. Reports emerging from within the palace suggest that the atmosphere around her changed in ways that are difficult to quantify, yet impossible to ignore. A sense of distance replacing familiarity, conversations becoming more measured, alliances less visibly expressed. And while none of this unfolded publicly, the internal awareness of change was unmistakable. Because within royal dynamics, absence often communicates more powerfully than direct confrontation. And a reduction in presence can signal a recalibration more clearly than any formal statement. Military circles, though outwardly silent, are believed to have responded with a level of attentiveness that reflects their understanding of such shifts. Because within that environment, honors are not symbolic gestures, but indicators of alignment. And when alignment changes, so too does the perception of representation, making the reassignment not merely a royal decision, but a broader signal about the direction in which institutional trust is moving. Within the palace itself, the consequences unfolded gradually but steadily. Long-standing assumptions about stability began to feel less certain, and relationships that once operated within clearly defined boundaries started to adjust. Not through overt conflict, but through subtle shifts in tone and positioning. Because in a system where hierarchy is both visible and deeply ingrained, even slight movements in influence create ripples that affect every layer of interaction. At the center of this transformation lies a deeper tension that has been present for some time, one that reflects the monarchy's ongoing negotiation between preservation and adaptation, between maintaining continuity and responding to evolving public expectations. And within that tension, different figures come to represent different approaches, with Catherine increasingly embodying a forward-facing vision that aligns with contemporary sensibilities, while Camilla represents a form of authority rooted in endurance and traditional structure, neither inherently weaker nor stronger, but positioned differently within the current moment. Princess Anne's intervention appears to have been guided by a recognition of this tension and a determination to address it before it reached a point of instability. Her decision suggesting an understanding that adaptation, when delayed too long, becomes reactive rather than strategic, and that by acting decisively, the monarchy retains control over its own evolution, rather than being forced into it by external pressure. The absence of an immediate response from King Charles III adds another layer of complexity to the situation, because within royal tradition, silence is rarely neutral. It functions as a deliberate tool, allowing space for interpretation while maintaining authority. And in this case, that silence has amplified speculation, not by confirming any single narrative, but by allowing multiple interpretations to coexist, each carrying its own implications about alignment, intention, and internal dynamics. This silence places the king in a position that is both powerful and precarious, balancing personal loyalty with institutional responsibility, and navigating a situation where any explicit statement could shift perception in ways that are difficult to control, making restraint not only a strategic choice, but perhaps the only viable one in a moment where clarity might provoke more disruption than it resolves. As the effects of the decision continue to unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that this was not an isolated adjustment, but part of a broader recalibration, one that extends beyond individual roles into the very structure of influence within the monarchy, redefining how authority is distributed and how it is perceived both internally and externally. Catherine's position now reflects not only recognition, but expectation, as her expanded role brings with it increased scrutiny and responsibility, placing her at the center of a narrative that is still developing, and one that will likely shape the monarchy's trajectory in the years to come. While Camilla's position, though not erased, becomes more conditional, subject to the evolving dynamics of support, perception, and strategic alignment. Princess Anne's role in this moment reinforces her reputation as a guardian of institutional continuity, someone willing to make difficult decisions in service of long-term stability, even when those decisions carry personal and emotional consequences for those involved. And in doing so, she underscores a fundamental truth about the monarchy, that its survival depends not on preserving comfort, but on maintaining relevance. Ultimately, what has taken place is less a dramatic upheaval and more a precise adjustment, one that has altered the balance without dismantling the structure. And it is this subtlety that makes it so significant, because changes that occur quietly often endure more deeply than those announced with spectacle, embedding themselves into the system in ways that become visible only over time. And as this new alignment continues to settle, one reality becomes increasingly difficult to ignore: that power within the monarchy does not disappear. It shifts, it adapts, and it repositions itself according to the demands of the moment. And in this instance, it has moved with a level of precision that suggests careful planning rather than coincidence, pointing toward a future in which the contours of influence may look familiar on the surface, yet function very differently beneath it. What remains now is not uncertainty about whether change has occurred, but anticipation of what that change will lead to. Because within a system as layered and historically rooted as the monarchy, every adjustment carries forward into the next, shaping not only present dynamics, but future possibilities. And if this moment is any indication, those possibilities are already being quietly, deliberately, and irreversibly defined.